These are stories where love meets betrayal. Stories that make you see life a little differently.
It happened quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the tipping of a scale too long held in suspension. Elena's actions, patient and precise, had reached their apex. The subtle disruptions, the carefully orchestrated reminders of presence, they had built a tension that no one, not even he, could ignore. I didn't plan for him to fall apart completely, Elena wrote. I only wanted him to see, to understand. But seeing him now, unraveling piece by piece, I feel a strange mixture of satisfaction and dread. The line between justice and cruelty is thinner than I imagined. I read her words late at night, the room dark except for the glow of my laptop. Outside, the city murmured with life, unaware of the quiet revolutions happening in small apartments and shadowed streets. Elena described the confrontation, not a shouting match, not a moment of physical threat, but a final reckoning of truths. The lies he told, the betrayals he hoped would be forgotten, the indifference he thought he could maintain, all confronted in a single moment of undeniable clarity. He looked at me, she typed, and I saw it. The recognition, the fear, the shame he had never allowed himself to feel. And I realized that this is what I wanted, but also what I feared. To hold that power over someone else is intoxicating and dangerous. I felt a shiver run through me, witnessing her story, feeling the weight of her decisions. I was confronted with my own boundaries. How far could I go in empathy without condoning? How much could I understand without becoming complicit? She continued, I think about what comes next. Do I stop now, or do I push further? Do I let the world see me only as the one who was wronged, or as the one who reclaimed herself? And then I remember, this is not about him anymore. This is about me. About surviving, about existing fully, about refusing to be silent ever again. Her reply was simple, almost fragile in its clarity. I know, and that is the risk I accept. To reclaim myself, I must face the shadow of what I have done. I cannot unsee what he has done to me, and I cannot ignore the consequences of my own actions. But I will not regret that I chose to exist. And then came the hardest part, the emotional reckoning. She wrote of the aftermath, how he began to see the emptiness in his own life, how he understood the cost of betrayal not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible loss. I feel a strange sorrow for him, she admitted, not for what he did, but for what he cannot undo. And I wonder if that makes me cruel or merciful. Perhaps both. I sat back in my chair, the words echoing. It was a moral maze, a reflection of everything I had come to understand about human pain, vengeance, and the reclaiming of agency. And yet, she continued, I also feel relief. I am not defined by what happened to me anymore. I am not a victim. I am the one who moves forward, the one who speaks, the one who exists. And that is worth the risk, the fear, and the uncertainty. I realized then that my role as witness had changed. I could no longer remain neutral. To watch without acknowledging the cost was itself a form of silence. And I had to choose. Speak, intervene, or continue observing the unfolding of someone else's moral and emotional reckoning. Elena wrote her final lines that night. The words weighted with the gravity of what she had done. I have taken back what I can. I have reminded him and the world that I am here. But I also know the shadow remains, the shadow of revenge, the shadow of choices made. I cannot control that. I can only control how I live in the aftermath. I closed my laptop, heart heavy but clear. Witnessing her journey, I had been forced to confront my own limits, my own morality, my own willingness to see the darkness without turning away. The reckoning was not just Elena's, it was mine too. And as I finally turned off the light and let the night swallow the city, I understood something profound. Survival, revenge, and redemption are threads of the same tapestry. The choices we make, the actions we take, the courage to speak and to exist, all of it is bound together. And the price we pay is not always for others. Sometimes it is for the self we are desperate to reclaim. That was the end of one story. Not of betrayal, nor of revenge, but of a quiet reckoning, where existence itself became the ultimate act of defiance. It started with a message, not a dramatic one, just a few quiet lines in an inbox that hadn't seen much life in months. Your stories helped me survive, but now I need to tell mine. Because I'm about to do something I can't take back. The name at the bottom was Elena. I didn't know her, but her words carried a weight I recognized. Since I started my podcast, after the betrayal, I had read hundreds of messages, women and men, pouring their pain into words, trying to find peace in the wreckage. But something about Elena's message stopped me. Maybe it was that last sentence. Maybe it was the quiet certainty in it. The sound of someone who wasn't asking for help, but for someone to witness what came next.
That night, I sat at my desk, the soft hum of the city outside my window. I opened her second message, and I began to read. We loved him for 7 years. We built a life, or at least I thought we did. We had our Sunday mornings, our shared books, our inside jokes. And then one night, I found his phone unlocked. It was like a door I was never meant to open. Her words spilled down the screen, raw, trembling, desperate to escape. There were photos, messages, plans for weekends when he told me he was working late. The woman was someone I knew, someone I trusted. I could almost hear her voice as I read, that fragile tremor between rage and heartbreak, the sound every betrayed soul knows too well. The next line was colder. So I decided to take something from him too. Not out of hate, but to remind him that I existed. I leaned back, staring at the screen. Part of me wanted to reply, to tell her not to do anything she'd regret. But another part, the one that had once been shattered and rebuilt,
understood that she was already past that point. The message ended simply. If you ever talk about me on your podcast, don't call me a victim. I'm just someone who stopped being silent. I closed my laptop and sat there in the dark, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant city sounds. Elena's words stayed with me like an echo that refused to fade. I thought I had moved on from betrayal. I thought forgiveness meant freedom. But that night, for the first time in a long time, I felt something cold stir inside me again. A memory of what it felt like to want revenge. And I realized maybe healing and revenge aren't opposites. Maybe sometimes one grows from the shadow of the other. That was how it began. The story of two women who never met, but who were bound by the same wound. The morning after her first message, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against my window. It was the kind of rain that blurred the streets, made the city feel quieter, more contained. I poured myself a cup of coffee and opened my laptop again. Elena had sent another message. This one was longer. She wrote about the moment the idea first formed in her mind, not a sudden flash of anger, but a creeping, deliberate thought that settled in like a shadow. I didn't want to hurt him in the way he hurt me, she wrote. I wanted to make him feel the absence he made me feel. To see that what he took for granted could be gone. She described the careful way she began observing him, the routine he followed, the people he trusted, the small cracks in his life that no one noticed. I started with small things, she continued. Little disruptions, missed appointments, forgotten tasks, subtle confusion. Nothing that would be traced back to me. Not yet. I needed him to feel unsettled, to realize that control wasn't his alone. I read her words, and I felt a chill. It wasn't hatred I sensed in her writing. It was precision. The kind of cold calculation that came from a wound so deep it reshaped your entire understanding of justice. I kept a journal, she added. Each reaction, each faltering step. And with every entry, I realized that my own fear was fading. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I was afraid of myself, of how far I might go. Because I understood that silence was what she needed. That sometimes the most potent act of witnessing is simply letting someone speak the truth of themselves. She went on to outline the first real step of her plan. I made him believe I had left for good, Elena wrote. I moved my things, sent a message saying I needed space. And then I watched. The way he searched for explanations, the way he lied to himself about what had happened. It was fascinating and painful all at once. Every lie he told, every excuse he created became a mirror. And I began to see myself in that mirror too. I didn't expect relief, she admitted. I didn't want relief. I wanted recognition. I wanted him to know that the life he thought was untouched had already changed, irrevocably. And I wanted to remember that I existed, beyond the mistakes and betrayals he used to define me. Reading this, I felt my own thoughts drift toward boundaries. My own, and the ones I had long assumed were solid. In the years I had hosted my podcast, I had learned to navigate the stories of others carefully, to measure empathy with caution. But Elena's words challenged every rule I had learned. Could revenge ever be justifiable? Could it ever be clean the way she described? Or was it inevitably a mirror into the darker corners of the self, showing us parts we might wish had remained hidden? S.H.E. wrote again, this time about preparation. The way she gathered information, the way she crafted situations without leaving evidence, the quiet artistry of subtle retribution. Every move was deliberate, she said. Not impulsive, not vengeful in the raw, screaming sense, but intentional. Every choice was a message, and every message was mine alone. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was creating. I noticed a change in her tone here. The lines no longer trembled. They were steady, precise, almost surgical. I could imagine her in her apartment, papers and notebooks spread out, maps and schedules, a life reorganized around a single, inexorable purpose. And yet there was fear woven through her clarity. I am afraid, she admitted. Not of him, not of the consequences he might face, but of myself, of the person I am becoming in the process. I wonder sometimes if the act of reclaiming power through someone else's loss leaves you hollow. I closed my eyes. That fear, the self-awareness beneath the resolve, is what made her story so dangerous and so compelling. She wasn't a villain. She wasn't a saint. She was someone alive in the full spectrum of her choices, and the spectrum was darker than most would dare admit. Then she detailed the moment she would enact the pivotal move of her plan, the confrontation disguised as coincidence, the small betrayal meant to echo the one she had endured. I will not meet him in anger, she typed. I will meet him in truth. The truth as he refuses to see it, and when he recognizes it, he will understand that he cannot unsee me, that I am no longer silent, no longer invisible. I felt a pang of recognition, not for Elena, but for the part of myself I had buried long ago. That cold, precise desire to make someone see what they had done, to hold them accountable in ways that cannot be undone. And I realized that the line between witnessing and participating had blurred. By reading her story, by following her plan in my mind, I was complicit in her journey. Not in her actions, but in the moral weight of imagining them, of holding them in my consciousness. Elena's final lines that night were almost tender. I don't want to hate, she wrote. I want to exist, to be seen, to reclaim what was taken. And maybe, in the act of creating my own narrative, I can finally breathe again. I leaned back, letting the words sink into me. The rain had stopped. The streets were wet, reflecting the lights in a way that made everything seem sharper, colder, clearer. I realized then that this was no longer just Elena's story. It had become mine too, a mirror in which I could see what I had feared most about myself. And I knew with quiet certainty that nothing would be the same again. The first week after Elena's messages passed in a strange, suspended rhythm. I didn't hear from her every day, but I could feel her presence in my inbox, in the spaces between her words, like a pulse I couldn't ignore. When she finally wrote again, it was with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the moment 1,000 times in her mind. She had begun. "I took the first step today," she typed. "Small, almost invisible. But it mattered. He noticed it. Not immediately, that would be too easy. But the subtle shift in his routine, the little hesitation in his voice, the unanswered questions lingering in the air, I watched it all unfold from a distance." I read and reread the lines, feeling the weight of her deliberate patience. She wasn't rushing. She was orchestrating. And as I followed along, I realized that my own mind was tracking every possibility, every consequence, every ethical line she might cross. "What I find strange," she continued, "is that I'm not angry. Not in the way you'd expect. My anger was an instrument, a hammer I once wielded blindly. Now I am calm, calculated. And in that calm, I see more clearly than ever what he lost the moment he betrayed me." I couldn't help but reflect on the meaning of revenge in this context. Was it justice? Was it closure? Or was it something more primal? A reminder to the world and to oneself that pain leaves a mark, and sometimes it must be mirrored. Elena described the first direct confrontation she had orchestrated. It was subtle, almost mundane. A message sent at the precise time he would see it, a slight change in schedule, the rearrangement of an appointment he thought he controlled. "He didn't suspect me," she wrote, "but he felt it. That's enough for now. Enough to remind him that the life he assumed he owned was already altered." I paused. I felt the tension coil in my chest, the same tension I remembered from my own past betrayals. That sharp awareness of cause and effect, of how one small action can ripple outward and reshape everything. "And yet," she admitted, "I hesitate. Not because I fear him, but because I fear myself. I see the lines I am crossing, the rules I am bending. Every act of reclamation carries a shadow, and sometimes that shadow is darker than the original wound." I could feel her struggle in the quiet spaces of her words. She wasn't mindless in her pursuit. She was conscious, painfully so. Every move weighed against what she might lose. Her own sense of morality, her own peace. I wrote back to her once, tentatively. A few lines, carefully measured. "Be aware. The closer you get to the edge, the harder it is to recognize where you begin and where revenge ends." Her response was almost immediate. "You are right," she typed, "and yet I cannot stop. Not now, not after what I have seen, what I have endured. I need to remind myself that I am still here, that my life is mine, even if I must take it back piece by piece." The way she framed it made me think about boundaries. How often we set them, how easily they shift, how sometimes we don't even realize they are being tested until it's too late. Watching Elena, I could see both the courage and the danger in crossing those lines. She described the second step of her plan, more tangible, more direct. She had intercepted a small but crucial lie he told someone else, exposing it not with accusation, but with truth, hidden in plain sight. He didn't know what came from me, she wrote, and yet he felt it. The subtle unraveling of certainty is far more terrifying than any argument or confrontation. He is beginning to understand that control is an illusion. I leaned back in my chair, imagining the scene she described. The careful timing, the calculated moves, the artistry in small disruptions. It was both mesmerizing and unsettling. As I listened to her unfold the story, I found myself reflecting on my own limits. How far would I go if I were in her position? Could I allow myself to act with such precision, such detachment? Or would guilt, conscience, and the fear of losing myself keep me tethered? I sometimes fear that the act of reclaiming power might leave me hollow, she admitted. But I also feel alive in a way I haven't before. There is clarity in this intentionality, a cruel, necessary clarity. I am learning who I am beneath the betrayal. Her words were stark, almost poetic. In them, I recognized the duality of revenge, a force that both defines and consumes, that can illuminate the self while casting shadows across the heart. And then she shared something unexpected, a moment of tenderness. I remember the life I once had, the small joys, the quiet mornings, the laughter that seemed endless. I mourn that person sometimes, but I do not mourn the lessons. I do not mourn the power I am reclaiming, and I do not mourn the self I am discovering, even if she is not entirely recognizable. Her words resonated with me. It was not just about revenge. It was about existence, about reclaiming a voice, about asserting that one's life cannot be erased by another's betrayal. In the days that followed, Elena continued to act with precision. Each move measured, each consequence anticipated. And I, in parallel, navigated the tension of my own moral compass. Witnessing her story, I was both participant and observer, drawn into a world where right and wrong were not easily defined. She wrote to me one night, the words sparse but heavy. I am afraid, yet I am not afraid. I am taking back what was mine, but I do not know what will remain when this is done. Perhaps the question is not what I take from him, but what I give to myself in return. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark. Outside, the city pulsed with life, indifferent to the quiet revolutions happening behind closed doors. I realized then that Elena's journey was not just about him, or even about betrayal. It was about the reclamation of self and the cost of walking a path where the shadow of revenge stretches long and cold. And I knew that the next steps, both hers and mine, would test everything we believed about justice, forgiveness, and the fine line that separates them. The day Elena set her plan into motion felt like a slow-motion shift in the world. She didn't announce it with fireworks or fury. It was quiet, meticulous, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. "I chose the moment carefully," she wrote. "A casual encounter, a setting he would recognize as ordinary, nothing staged, nothing forced, but the timing, that is everything. Timing makes all the difference between chaos and revelation." I pictured her standing in a cafe, the kind with soft morning light and the faint smell of roasted coffee beans. Her target would arrive unaware, thinking the world was exactly as he believed it to be. But Elena had already altered the world, subtly, in ways he couldn't detect until it was too late. She described the precision of her observations, the tilt of his head, the pause in his step, the micro-expressions that betrayed his hidden awareness. "He recognized me before he could speak," she typed. "Not the old me, not the me he once loved, the me I became, the one he ignored, underestimated, and thought he could erase." There was no anger in her words, no dramatic outburst, just the quiet authority of someone reclaiming her place in a narrative that had long been written without her consent. I could feel my own pulse quicken as I read. There is something unnerving about witnessing someone assert their existence in a way that forces others to confront their failures. And yet, part of me wanted to intervene, to remind her that some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. She continued, "I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I only reminded him, gently, unmistakably, that he cannot undo what he has done, that the choices he made have consequences beyond his understanding, that I am here and I am no longer silent." I could almost see him in my mind's eye, stunned, confused, perhaps even afraid. The moment was not violent. It was sharper than violence, a revelation, unavoidable and precise. Elena paused in her writing, then added something almost intimate. I saw the recognition in his eyes. Not guilt, not shame exactly, but a tremor of comprehension. He realized, finally, that the life he believed he controlled was already gone, and I was the one who had taken it from him. As I read, I wrestled with my own role. By following her story, by witnessing it in detail, was I endorsing it? Or was I simply bearing witness to the consequences of betrayal and the human need for justice, however imperfectly applied? And she wrote about the aftermath, the way he stumbled through his day, uncertain, hesitant, as if his perception of the world had shifted without his permission. "Every glance, every interaction now carries weight," she explained. I didn't need to confront him with anger or accusation. The mere fact of my presence, the knowledge that I was no longer invisible, was enough to disrupt his life, enough to make him remember what he lost. And there was the subtle danger. "I feel the shadow stretching long behind me," she admitted. "I know the power I hold in these small moments, and I am afraid of what that power could do if I let it consume me. It is intoxicating to watch the world respond to you not as you were, but as you have chosen to become." I understood that fear. Revenge, even when measured, carries its own gravity. It demands attention, precision, and sometimes sacrifices parts of the self that cannot be reclaimed. I typed back, carefully, almost hesitantly. You are walking a line few dare approach. Remember that what you give to yourself in this process will last longer than what you take from him. Her reply was swift, almost defiant. I know, she wrote, and yet I cannot stop. I am not doing this for anger. I am doing this to exist, to reclaim the life he tried to erase. And in doing so, I am learning what it truly means to survive. Later that night, I thought about boundaries again. Watching Elena, I realized the delicate balance of moral witness. How close can one allow oneself to come to another's darkness without becoming entwined? How much can I empathize without enabling? How much can I understand without condoning? Elena's next steps were small, deliberate, but they rippled outward in ways she could not fully control. A misplaced message, a delayed call, a forgotten appointment. Each disruption seemed minor, almost mundane, yet to him they were seismic. The illusion of control he had clung to crumbled in increments he could neither anticipate nor undo. I am learning, she wrote, that subtlety is more powerful than confrontation. That to reclaim your power, you do not need to shout or strike. You only need to be present, to be visible, to be remembered. And I, sitting alone with her messages, felt the tension between witnessing and intervening. I could see the justice in her actions, the reclamation of self, but I also saw the precipice, the danger of being consumed by the shadow she was tracing with such careful hands. The final line of her latest message struck me most of all. I do not know where this path ends, but I know that for the first time in years, I am not afraid. And perhaps that is enough. I closed my laptop and listened to the silence of my apartment. Outside, the city lights flickered on wet streets. Inside, I realized that both of us had crossed thresholds we could not ignore. Elena into action, and I into the uncharted territory of moral witness. And I knew that the next chapter, the consequences, the reckoning, the final choices, would test us both in ways we had not yet imagined.
Sometimes pain doesn't come from enemies, but from the ones we trusted the most. Maybe that's how life teaches us to see the truth. Could you forgive such a betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. More stories are coming, stories that will touch your heart.